report one of your wise elders in this area, Gene Houston, who's here with us tonight. And I'd like to thank all of you for having the courage to come here and hear about something which doesn't exist. The interesting thing about this whole subject are the many paradoxes involved. And to most people, of course, this is the stuff of as Lord Hill Norton says, and the larger 4-hour tape that we have that you can get back there, you know, this has been the target of the rubbishing in the tabloids for decades, when it should have been the subject of the highest consideration by our best scientists, our policymakers, our diplomats, and our wise elders, all of whom have been robbed of the opportunity to deal with something of immense importance. Not long ago, well, no, it wasn't long ago, maybe about 5 years ago, I was doing a briefing for a board of directors for an institute in the Bay Area, and a man that many of you know, at least by his last name, Senator Claiborne Pell. I partially went to college on a Pell grant, those of us who didn't have much money. And he and I were having a meeting, discussion after this briefing I did for this board of directors, and he had flown out to meet with me because he was very interested in the subject. And he turned to me and he says, you know, Dr. Greer, I've been interested in this and I've tried to get information through channels for many years, and I can't get any information. I've been in the Congress since the same year Jack Kennedy went in, which I think was 53 or something like this. And I've been chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And he was sort of a bit agitated about this. And then he asked, he said, well, would you come and brief my staff on it? I said, well, I'd be happy to. You know, if I can get out of my work in the ER, then I was still, you know, a wife, 4 kids, 3 dogs, 2 cats, a medical career, and this. You know, it's like take a rock and kill me, you know. Anyway, but I said, well, I'll do that. But I said, you know, you're in good company. Because I've recently had meetings with the Central Intelligence Agency Director, James Woolsey. We have people who have worked with a number of U.S. presidents who made inquiries into this and were told nothing or denied access. I have personally briefed the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, J2, who have told me that they were denied access. One of those men, after he was given by me a code name into a compartmented project, got to the project and was told, sir, you don't have a need to know. This, the head of intelligence, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Get to that later. So I said, you know, you're in good company. You're in very good company. I said, but here's the real tragedy. We are being visited by advanced extraterrestrial civilizations. This we can prove in any court of law and by any impartial scientific group. We also can prove that there is a group unappointed by the executive branch, unelected by the people, who have arrogated to themselves the exclusive rights to this information. And you have been deprived of dealing with this. And you know what? You've been deprived of dealing with the ultimate foreign relations issue. And I pointed to the stars above our head. We were out on the patio. And Senator Pell looked at me through his horn-rimmed glasses and blinked and went, well, Dr. Greer, I'm afraid you might be right. I said, well, I am. And this falls into the category of the foregone opportunities that our civilization has suffered through excessive secrecy. CIA Director Woolsey, who was Clinton's first CIA director, wanted to have this information come out, but he told me, how do we disclose what we can't get access to? And it was a very emotional meeting for me on December 13, 1993, when my wife and I flew up to Washington to meet with him. Because I realized at the end of the meeting that the man wasn't lying. My assumption when I went to the meeting, after I was invited to come and tell him about this issue because he was being denied access, was that this was a complete prevarication. Couldn't possibly be true. But in reality, he was telling the absolute truth. And he was holding his head in his hands going, oh my God, what am I going to do? I said, well, here's what we need to do. And I gave him Be careful what you ask for. So I gave him a outline of recommended actions that need to be taken. But they would require executive action that to some would be frightening. And here we sit in 2002, 9 years later, in the same pickle we were in 1993. Now, this situation isn't going to change by itself because the stakes are so great to maintain the secrecy that to make that change, we need all of you to do everything you can to see that it happens. The stakes are huge because it isn't just about whether or not there are little gray men or little green men or little whatever. Yes, there are extraterrestrial life forms visiting this planet. But this is more about the human future than it is visitors from other worlds. This is more about how we see and then manifest that good future, which all of us hold in our heart and all of us have seen in our minds. And it cannot happen in the current situation where scientists in the civilian sector who discover the laws of physics that permit energy generation out of the plenum of space around us are tortured and abused, thrown in jail, or given neuroleptic drugs and put in mental hospitals, all of which I have seen in the last 6 months in my interviews with scientists who worked on these issues. It cannot happen in a world where our political leaders whom we have elected and sent to Washington, whether it be a Senate Intelligence Committee member, like the very courageous and heroic Richard Bryan of Nevada, who uncovered the National Reconnaissance Office theft of billions of dollars in black funds in the early 90s, or a president, or one of our stand-up guys at the Pentagon who wants to get to the bottom of this and is a general or an admiral and is lied to. It cannot happen when the news media is infiltrated and controlled by intelligence operatives while they feign openness and freedom and make a mockery of the Constitution of the United States. These fundamental issues and structural problems, some would say, are really rooted in a spiritual malaise and a sleepiness, a hypnosis, a fog, a funk that has pervaded society and has grown worse and worse. And it's like the Night of the Living Dead, you know the movie, everybody sort of walking. Some that say the dumbing of America is complete. But I see another thing happening. There's an awakening as well taking place on a parallel track, and this is why you are here. Yes. And that is how we have all gotten here. So while some sleepwalk, others awake, that we are that vanguard that will see and create the new world. Not necessarily someone else's new world, but the new world that we deserve. Now let me describe this to you in sort of broad terms. You know, I had a meeting with a man who's one of the witnesses. I don't think he made it into this cut. You know, we have a 1-hour tape, a 2-hour tape, a 4-hour tape, a 35-hour tape, and a 118-hour tape. To get you an idea how all this was done, lest you get impressed by all this, this has been done by the seat of our pants by a bunch of pure-hearted, wonderful volunteers. I took these interviews. I was running around the world with a digital camera, mostly on my own, without an assistant 90% of the time, interviewing all these military guys. I then had an Apple computer at home. You know, I had a dual G4. I got a dual G4. Now this is, you understand, I'm a medical doctor. Technical, mechanical, idiot, writ large. But here I am, I'm going, well, how am I going to do all this editing? It's something you just can't give out to someone. So I'm sitting here with 120 hours of videotape. And I'm sitting in my living room in Charlottesville, Virginia, where the University of Virginia is, and I'm sitting there with this beautiful view of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and what am I going to do? So I have someone come and give me like a 1-day course in the Mac computer iMovie. Okay, you know the little iMovie thing you get on your Mac? And I got 100 gigabytes of memory, storage, hard drive, and we started doing it. So I sat there, and in a couple of months, edited it down to about 35 hours of videotape. from 119 hours. Then to 17 hours. Then I gave it to Jeff Thill, who works for Laser Pacific, a post-production house in LA. He took those 17 hours and with some guidance from me made these tapes on his child's Mac computer in their playroom in between a 40 or 50 hour work week, 2 young children, a wife, and a 2-hour each way commute from northern San Diego County up to LA where we work. That's how this is happening. But in the course of doing all that craziness, I got to meet some incredible people, some of whom were in this tape, some of whom aren't. One guy is a man named Fred Trofil, who in 1953 was at the Toronto Air Station outside of Toronto, where he saw not only the so-called gun camera footage from World War II with the Spitfires and all these things, filming what had been called the Foo Fighters. Yes, there's a rock band called Foo Fighters. They took their name from the phenomenon during World War II. But in the course of his working in the electronics area of that base, he saw an experiment where in 1953, now I was in a twinkle in my father's eye at that time, an object sitting on an electronic device dematerialized and rematerialized in another room under controlled conditions reproducibly. Almost 50 years ago. Absolutely true. I have other men that I've interviewed and women who work in scientific projects where the ability to generate enormous amounts of energy out of the space around us has been tested and developed and perfected since before I was born. And the anti-gravity things you see with these UFOs that float around, a lot of them are made in special programs at the north base of Edwards. You want to know where I'll draw you a map. Show you exactly where you want to go. You want to go there? Get your bulletproof vest on. But I know exactly where these facilities are, and Northrop and Lockheed E-Systems, Science Applications International Corporation, and a few other entities have worked on the electrogravitic sciences that permit you to cancel mass, not just gravity, but mass cancellation, so that you can have something become literally weightless and move at thousands of miles per hour and make a right-hand turn, which is what these radar operators have seen. We've been building those since before my uncle's lunar module. My uncle designed the lunar module, before his lunar module landed on the moon in 1969. Now, he didn't know about it. That's the parallel black space program. But the fact is, all the needs of the human race for us to live together in abundance, without poverty, without pollution, have been vouchsafed unto us since before the time I was born. I ain't no spring chicken. And so I want you to reflect on that the world we have is a faint shadow of the world that is there on another, in a sense, parallel reality. And it's time for there to be this rubber band effect of us catching up with a timeline that is the evolutionary timeline of what I feel is the will of God. I don't believe, as this one man said, that it's the will of God that a small group of people should abscond with technologies that ensure 80% of the world living in poverty and misery and early and premature death. That is not the Creator that I know. So that change is something that's going to happen because the good people wake up and act. I lived for a number of years in Israel, in Haifa, and shared an apartment block with a number of survivors of Auschwitz and Dachau and Birkenau. And they had their tattoos, and I got to know them quite well. And you know, as they opened up to me, because I was this boy from North Carolina who didn't know anything really about all that. I was a young man, very young boy in my late teens, early 20s. And they said to me, you know, it wasn't what the Nazis did that was so shocking. It was that our good friends and the neighbors and the good people looked the other way as they stuffed our children into boxcars going to Auschwitz. Now, here we have a situation where these solutions exist. And yes, there is a maniacal, dangerous, powerful, although somewhat invisible group, a number of whose members I know personally, that have been keeping this thing off the radar screen for reasons that we can get into. But it is not going to happen by itself. Those good people on the planet who understand where we should be and must be to create and manifest the vision of the promise of Earth and humanity. We must do that. Because if we don't, others will continue on their plan. Now, I don't mean to give a morality lecture here, but to me, this is the essence of morality. I've had people say, how on earth have you taken on doing this? I said, well, I never intended to. Another part of me always knew I would. From the time I was a young child, actually. But another part of me is horrified. I mean, you know, if you go through all the medical training, and you want to go through pre-med, organic chemistry, med school, residency, the Marquis de Sade invented an internship here in residency. And then you hit the apex of your career, you kick it to the curb to be doing this. But here it is. I can't turn away from the truth that we can prove and the sciences I have seen when I know that the future of the earth has so much promise. And it's from the lack of a few people gathering together to do the right thing, regardless of the personal cost. Now, someone asked me once, well, isn't this dangerous for you to be doing this? I go, well, I'm an emergency doctor. Let me tell you a little story. One afternoon, 2 boys came in from the high school, DOA. One stabbed through the left ventricle of the heart, the other one eviscerated with their intestines up on their chest. The right iliac artery severed. One we were able to resuscitate and save for only a day. He died of disseminated intravascular coagulation. I don't know what that is, never mind. And the other one we couldn't, because only we could open his chest, but he was gone. You know what it was about? One guy petted the other guy's girlfriend on the fanny. That's it. Knife fight, dead. 2 people, 2 young boys. Now, I tell you this story in sort of a graphic way to say people live and die and pass through this world, however fleetingly, over ephemera, lives dedicated to ephemera, somewhat meaningless deaths. This is the pearl of great price. You don't throw this one back. If you read that testimony and look at that testimony and understand what the stakes are, you're not able to turn away from it. So I find myself on this hook. I put myself on it. But I find myself in a situation where you can't walk away from that and then look at yourself in the mirror, because you're no better than the people who look the other way as the children were put into boxcars going to Auschwitz. I was discussing this with Ambassador Jim George, a Canadian ambassador who had been ambassador to 9 countries, and he said, he's wanted his whole life to be able to see that these technologies, which he has known about for decades, could get out to the public and alleviate the suffering and lift the burden from Gaia, the earth, who is being crushed by the way we live upon her. This can all be turned around. And we can do precisely as much or as little, as quickly or slowly as we will, as we evince that volition and the effort to make it so. Now, it's not as easy as Jean-Luc Picard on the Enterprise saying make it so, but we can do it. And we are doing it. One of the gratifying things to see is that this all started with a group of people. It's like Margaret Mead saying a few people in their living room vowing to do something. And we were sitting there in my living room once, and I said, well, now, my initial project, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, went out and had a senior diplomatic team to go out and make contact with these extraterrestrial vehicles and signal to them and interact with them. We literally had them come and hover in the field with us 10 feet above the ground. This is how the Army intelligence head found out about what I was doing and tried to pull me into his black cell. That's another story we'll get to. Now, during this, it was made very clear to me that there are numerous extraterrestrial civilizations waiting, sort of waiting. They're observing and waiting for us to get to that point of maturity as a global civilization where we can be peaceful and interact with them in some kind of conscious and peaceful level. Right now, we have electromagnetic pulse weapons tracking and targeting and occasionally hitting and destroying these extraterrestrial vehicles. We have numerous witnesses who have been on retrieval teams where they have been part of the recovery of these devices that we have downed. When I told Mrs. Boutros-Ghali that, she turned as white as a sheet. She's Egyptian. And she was just like, oh my God. She says, this can't be so. I said, it is so. It is the greatest threat to the peace and security of the world in the history of the human race. So we have, on one level, those activities. On another level, we've got this enormous potential, and we have to choose. We are at one of these pregnant moments in the history of the human race where we have to choose whether we want to go down the path of destruction and more suffering and a further meltdown, or we want to choose that good future that every one of you conceive and manifest in your minds and hearts, and you know it's true. And that is something, is a choice, and that is a choice that we can make or not make. We can grab it and run with it and make it so, or turn away from it. So I found myself unable to turn away from it. And so I stand here tonight. Where am I? In Ashland. I never know where I am. And we find ourselves moving more and more towards that goal because the truth has its own power. And I remember astronaut Ed Mitchell telling me once, he says, well, you know, you've taken off an awfully terrible thing to bite off and chew here. And, but just put one step in front of the other. And the winds of the universe will blow in your sails and carry wherever it is that you need to go. And that's how we have to do this. Don't think too much about it, because you can't do it if you do. But understand that this is the right thing to do. That the illegal secrecy, I'm not talking about reasonable secrecy and classification. I'm talking secrecy that is demonstrably and provably illegal, outside the rule of law. That is something which exists because there are cartels and groups and interests. We call them special interests now in Washington. But these are the mother of all special interests who want to preserve the $5.5 trillion a year oil, gas, coal, fossil fuel, and geopolitical order that flows therefrom. So this is something which, while understandable and nothing new, has reached the point where year has run into decade and decade has run into another century and millennium. To continue it is to ensure the destruction of our civilization. I will remind you that a figure, no less a figure, than Admiral Roscoe Hillenkoetter. In this book there's a document and some quotes from him, and he was the first CIA director. And he said in a letter to Congress and to the New York Times in 1960, just before Eisenhower left office, that the secrecy surrounding UFOs was a threat to the national security. Not that the UFOs were. If the extraterrestrial vehicles were a threat to us, it would have been point, set, match about the time we started detonating nuclear weapons. We would have been all cooked. Adios, amigos. But instead what happened was that people did not listen to our friend Ike. My father said that when I was born, I was as bald as he was. I'm getting there now again. But he said this, and as I read this, remember that this is not Abby Hoffman. This is a two-term conservative Republican president and five-star general, Eisenhower. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. The potential. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberty or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert, knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. He said this as it has been explained to me by Brigadier General Lufkin, whose testimony is in this book, this white book, who is a Brigadier General in the Army National Guard and was at the time of Eisenhower's last 2 years in office a grunt in the White House Signal Corps. And he said he was with the president as he received UFO reports, and he used to doodle pictures of UFOs during staff meetings. He was so interested in this subject. And yet, he heard him complain bitterly about this military-industrial machine that had hijacked into the corporate world and into the contracting world, what they call the Beltway bandits inside Washington that go and rotate revolving door from covert black military operations into SAIC, Lockheed, and other places. And they were not telling him what they were really doing, and he was too smart a man to know otherwise. But he didn't know what to do. Fast forward a couple of years to June 1963, when John F. Kennedy was flying to Berlin to give his speech, I Am a Berliner. And on that plane was the chief steward of Air Force One, an Air Force officer who's a friend of mine, who said that Kennedy began to talk to him about the extraterrestrial issue and the fact that he had seen the bodies and the spacecraft that had been stored in some of these facilities, but that the projects dealing with the sciences and the entire control of the operation, and I'm quoting now, was out of my hands, and I don't know why. And as this officer said this, he was weeping as he entertained the idea that the Commander-in-Chief of the United States would have been kicked to the curb by people desperate to keep this knowledge and this science away from us. And then, during the Iran-Contra imbroglio, we have this interesting insight from the now current Senator Daniel Inouye of Hawaii. And he said, there exists a shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself. Now, as we entertain that quote, given in a hearing by a senator of the U.S. Senate, imagine that what he was dealing with was not even 0.001% as sensitive as this information tonight. Because what we're talking about here has been the wholesale theft and hijacking of our good future. And I say this because it doesn't take a lot to do a simple mathematical and strategic analysis of the situation in the world. America and Europe, 600 million people. That's it, out of 6 billion. 1/10. 1 out of 10. All of Europe and America. 280 here, 320 there. No. 600 million. Now, what happens? Let's say that 10% more of the world's population live like we do. Lovely air-conditioned homes and SUVs and wonderful jets. Well, you know, the idea of a noble savage, most people really would like to have refrigeration for their food and clean water so their children aren't dying of cholera. If another 10% of the world's population lived as we did, It would be impossible to have enough fossil fuels to go around. It is impossible. We don't even have the refinery, the pumping, or the reserves to do it. It cannot happen. So we live in a world order that ensures 80% of the world is living in poverty, where the gap between the rich and the poor nations is growing each year, where 225 individuals and families have a net worth equal to half the world's population. True statistic. Now, I am by no means a socialist or communist, but on the other hand, something has gotten out of whack. And it's the fundamental structure of the energy flow of the planet. It's almost a spiritual thing. Don't just think of materialism. And what happens is that in that milieu, there cannot be the rapprochement that we have to have between the first and the third world. There cannot be this coming back together in peace. Because where there is enormous inequality and injustice, there will be instability, and there will be warfare, and yes, there will be terrorism, and there will be other problems. Now add into this strange admixture the environmental conundrum, where you have a situation in which we are burning up the world's atmosphere, where half of the polar ice cap has melted on the northern pole, from 16 feet thick to 8, where there are lakes at the North Pole, where huge chunks of Antarctica are floating off the sides of Delaware, and some of our states back east. You add all this together, and you see that there's great wisdom in this lovely Chinese saying that I like to quote. Unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we are going. Don't you love the way the Chinese put things? So simple, makes it perfectly clear. Well, where are we going? You know, we're the proverbial frog in the pot being just at the point of boiling. We're just right before the boiling point. And we're sitting around eating Cheetos watching Jay Leno, disporting ourselves on our thrones, unawares that these things are happening. Or maybe we don't want to be too aware because we don't know that there's a solution. Now here's the big good news. With all that, I don't want to drag you down. I'm just trying to paint the realistic picture. But here's the great news. The solution is there. You don't think these UFOs that you've seen flying around here at Klamath Falls, anybody seen them out there near Mount Shasta? How many people have seen some of these things zipping around out here? They're out here. Now, what you'll find is that those things are not using Exxon Jet A fuel or solid rocket boosters or anything of the sort to get around. They're using a physics, an electromagnetics and physics known to both humans and extraterrestrials for many decades, and humans, even outside these covert super black projects, have stumbled across this same phenomenon. Townsend Brown, who worked on the electrogravitic anti-gravity things back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, knew about it. Tesla knew about some of this. There are other inventors, but it's never made its way to market. You don't see these things coming off the conveyor belts in Detroit. And it's because the change isn't just about money. You know, like money to you and me is about, gee, let's see, I got the 2 kids in college, and I got to pay the taxes, and that's what we think of money.
Absolutely.
We're talking about trillions of dollars.
Okay.
We're talking about the way the world runs. We're talking about geopolitical power. And we're talking about this information coming out causing the biggest tectonic plate shift geopolitically, socially, culturally, scientifically, spiritually, and theologically in the history of mankind. It is nothing less than that. Lawrence Rockefeller, when I was out at his ranch in the Grand Tetons, pulled me outside on the deck one night to talk alone. I was there with a bunch of spooks and people. And, he has this beautiful Remington, the Remington with the Native American on horseback with the headdress looking up at the stars. Of course, they have the original of everything. So we're there, and we're having this conversation. He says, well, Dr. Greer, that the implications of this are so vast and so profound that no aspect of life on earth will be unchanged by it. I said, yes, of course, Lawrence. That's why it's been kept secret. As my friend who set up the meeting between me and the CIA director said, it isn't because this is the silly season of the tabloids that this has been kept secret. It is because it is a huge, big deal, in cap letters, he said. And when this change happens, imagine this beautiful world, but imagine the big change. Those in the geopolitical catbird seat are going to have to make room. Now, what do I mean by that? Visualize this. A device no bigger than the space taken up by this thing that can generate a few megawatts of energy from the ambient electromagnetic flux field, or the quantum vacuum space around us here in this room. Every cubic centimeter estimated to have enough power to run the Earth for one day. It's that much. And you have figured out how to access it, which we have. And that thing can be in a village in India, or sub-Saharan Africa, or South America, or wherever. And there are no electric utility lines going into it, and the energy can run that village, provide clean water, electrification, refrigeration, without pollution, and without damaging the environment. Moreover, any manufacturing done, the energy required to do 100% scrubbing of the air and water and 100% recycling is there. The reason we don't do it now is the energy costs are so high that it gets to the point of diminishing return because we're burning up coal and oil to get the energy. It changes the equation of everything. How wonderful! But think about this. There are 1.1 billion people in India. Almost double the population of all of America and Europe. And what that means is that when this information comes out and the first scientist says, well, how are these things working? And our scientists say, well, here's how you build one. It's the end of the world as we know it. That REM song, great song, as we know it. It is the closing of one chapter in the human history and experience and the opening of another. From an era of a zero-sum game of scarcity and fighting over a few material crumbs to an opening of a global civilization without poverty and with abundance. And when that happens, we will have to share this geopolitical world. We will have to have a world together that we will respect and honor all peoples. Yeah. And we can't just kick them to the curb in a hegemony that requires that we dismiss all of these other peoples, because they will begin very quickly. Within 10 to 20 years, they will have a gross domestic product and a technological and economic prowess equal to or exceeding that of the United States of America and Europe combined, and just India. It is the biggest change ever in the history of the world. Now, this is why it's so frightening to people whose jobs require that they maintain the status quo. I had an admiral say to me, you're right, this should have been done 50 years ago, but I'm going to retire in 5 years. Just keep this under wraps until I get to retire. I'm not kidding, it sounds hilarious. I was meeting with a senior official at the National Science Foundation and one of the directors of NASA for 11 hours, count them, 11 hours, and I can say a lot in 11 hours. Mouth Sal. And these people said, absolutely, we're convinced this is real, do everything you can. And when I said, well, will you help us? And they said, oh, well, it would be dangerous in my career. Let's see, ambition around my career ambition, the future of the world. My career ambition, the future of the world. Now, seriously, it's this Faustian deal that's been made where for a few crumbs and this illusion of security, we have bartered away the Empyrean realm descending on this planet. It's that simple. Don't make that false thing real. Let's make the choice to do the right thing. And I assure you, whatever the sacrifice, it will be worth it. One of the things that I've learned in the last 12 years of dealing with this issue is that when you put one step in front of the other, that the cosmic being, the great being, my dad was half Cherokee, so the great being. The great being is there to support. It will happen. It will start unfolding, and that's what's happening. Even though all this Disclosure Project event got on the news and was then taken down because the national security apparatus began to panic on May 9th, and this is true. The first hour of this National Press Club event that had over 400,000 people trying to see a webcast was electronically and externally jammed. And this I've been told by the people who were at the National Press Club, security and also doing the actual webcasting technical. They'd never seen anything like it. But they got back up, and you know what? Eventually millions saw it. We're getting up to 800,000 people a day on our website. And here's some news. The biggest internet webcast in history was that event on May 9th. The #1 videotape news event ever downloaded and viewed on the internet is the National Press Club 2-hour tape of those 20 men and women talking about what they know. So even if the media elites look the other way, the people are not that damn stupid. People know what the truth is, and when they hear it, they know it, and then they can act. And that's what's happening. When I was at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base meeting with the Foreign Aerospace Science and Technology Center, FASTIC, which had been called the Foreign Technology Division, that the New Mexico extraterrestrial crash remains were sent to. I was meeting there at the request of the head of Intelligence Joint Staff, and Colonel Panola, who was the head of that operation, at one point asked me, well, do you think that these civilizations could be a threat to the national security? I laughed. I went, hello. Let's see. We have interstellar transport capability. We figured out the fabric of space-time. I said the Earth could be turned into a cinder floating through space in 0.1 nanosecond. The question isn't that. The question is, what is their intent? Why are they here? For that matter, why are we here? And what in the world are we doing? These are some profound questions. But when you look at this, and you look at the evidence, you see that there are a multitude of extraterrestrial civilizations. The last estimate, between 50 and 75 different civilizations have been cataloged by the compartmented projects I've dealt with. None of them are hostile to the human race, but many of these little beings are very worried about what we're doing in the way of hostility. Now think about this for a moment. You come from outer space. Perhaps you've been monitoring life here for decades, for centuries, nay, for millennia. Maybe since the beginning of life on Earth. Who knows? And within one person's lifespan, my grandmother's lifespan, we go from horse and buggies to landing on the moon. And my grandmother was horse and buggies in North Carolina, and her son, my uncle, was the senior project engineer who designed the lunar module. How cool is that? But that same civilization has engaged in world wars with more and more fearsome weapons of destruction. And in the 1940s, discover, invent, create the thermonuclear weapons that can destroy an entire biosphere, an entire world. And we're starting to go out into space. Now, my friends, you would have to be galactically brain dead not to be concerned about this. Think about it. Let's look through the eyes of another civilization for a moment. Would you not be in a state of great concern to see the trajectory that Earth is on? Because unless we change directions, we are going to end up where we're going. Is it any wonder then that Professor Jacobs, when he was an Air Force officer, was present at the Vandenberg facility in the 1960s when an intercontinental ballistic missile was test-fired and went up into space, and as it exited the atmosphere when it was at subspace, an extraterrestrial vehicle came in that he filmed and neutralized that warhead and had it just disappear and evaporate. That happened. The testimony is in that book and is in these tapes, and you can take it to the bank. It happened because we have corroborating documents from his commanding officer that it happened. I'm not talking about speculation and lights in the sky and people who, fell off a turnip wagon drunk and saw something. These are the people who were in charge of the nuclear assets of the United States. Consider this. Colonel Dietrichson, whose testimony is in this material, and I encourage you all to get as many of these as you can and give them to all your friends. Colonel Dietrichson said that he, as an officer in the Air Force, got assigned to the Atomic Energy Commission and then became an employee, a senior official. He was responsible for quality control at all the Atomic Energy Commission facilities in the United States and also overseas that had nuclear weapons stored there, manufacturing, etc. He said at every single one of those facilities in the 50s and 60s, there were these objects hovering, at times landing, sampling, and monitoring what we were doing. Moreover, he has testified, and we have corroboration for this as well from other witnesses, that an insane project, it was Black Project, was hatched to put a thermonuclear device on a missile that can make it to the moon and hit the moon and explode it so that it would show the Soviets how muscular we were in our nuclear prowess. And that as that missile was fired and left our atmosphere and became exo-atmospheric, an extraterrestrial vehicle came in and neutralized it. Yes, you said right. I agree. But what if you're the people wanting to do that? What if you're the people who want to spread your wings militarily? We're talking about military adventurism and misadventurism on steroids. And what you find is those folks having taken these actions not as signs of saying, please don't blow up your beautiful world, and know this, we won't let you blow up this other place out in space with these weapons. Instead, they've taken it as an affront, a clipping of their wings, and have hardened their position and increasingly militarized that relationship. It's a very dangerous game being played, and those of us who know the inside game, inside out, have to tell you that it isn't much longer. Werner von Braun, Dr. Carol Rosin had been his spokesperson for the last 4 years of his life, on his deathbed with tubes coming out of his side, begged her to do everything possible to stop the placement of weapons into space, because he had told her in 1974, almost 30 years ago, that first there'd been the Cold War, and that would be wound up, and then there'd be the rogue states, and then global terrorism. We had this testimony from her before 9/11, I'll remind you. And then the final trump card that would be played is that they would hoax an extraterrestrial threat so that trillions of dollars could be spent replacing massive weapon systems in space, in a sort of eschatological, bizarre, end-of-the-world scenario that only a madman or a kook could like. Now, the stakes then cannot be higher. Can there be anything more important than understanding this and joining together to resolve, to correct the problem, and to manifest the world that we all see is possible? I will say this: we have the ability to do whatever it is that we see and empower ourselves to do. And I have seen this in my own life, and I've seen it in many lives. And I think that if we understand that we have this wonderful opening right now in history to walk through a doorway that is there, beckoning, inviting, that we can create a world that will be peaceful here and in space, universal peace, that will eliminate poverty, bind up the wounds, that will eliminate the damage that we're doing to the earth. And this we have within us to manifest and to fulfill. I hope you can join us. Thank you. God bless you. Share with you from your need, not from mine. Yes. Just speak up and I'll repeat it. Just tell me.
I've heard that some psychics are saying that in years to come, in the near future, we could have a world catastrophe that could perhaps cause a pole shift and cause famines on the earth, that would move the Chinese to want to invade the United States and take our breadbasket for their food. And that's one of the reasons why we're hiding our flying saucer technology is to fight the Chinese in this coming battle.
You're saying you've heard some information from psychics about a fearsome scenario with some earth changes and polar shifts that could cause some events to happen that would invoke the Chinese to try to invade America, get to our breadbasket, et cetera, and so on and whatnot. Who knows? I mean, let me tell you something about the future. The future is a multi-phased, probable future. I don't know how many of you have had lucid dreams or experiences where, I met my wife in a dream. I know this sounds crazy for a doctor to say, but I was in Israel and I had this wonderful dream. And then I had it another night and another night. 5 nights in a row, I was introduced by this beautiful, enlightened being to this woman that I never met. And I was told you should marry her. He said how old she would be. She'd be older than I would be. She'd be come from far. He gave me all this detail. And I went, come on. And then it happened again, and again, and again. So finally I told my friend, I said, I need to find out who this is. Well, I started looking for her. Finally one day, this wonderful being, Emily, my wife, came from the Caribbean where she was a Peace Corps worker and visited Israel where I was living for a conference, and I saw her and I went, my God, that's her. Well, you don't go up to a stranger and say hello. I had a dream that you were supposed to get married. So, so we started talking. And it was like we'd always known each other. And I was no more interested in being married than man and woman. But I knew it was the thing to do. So we talked, and then maybe an hour and a half, and I said a prayer. I told God, this is a big deal. I wanted her to contact me out of the blue, without me ever trying to get hold of her again. Well, before she could get back to the Caribbean and Barbados, she felt so compelled to get hold of me that she wrote me, didn't know my last name, but someone she was traveling with did. And it got to me. And with that, I wrote and told her this whole story. She packed her bags. We had a 10-day courtship in Alaska. All the way to Barrow, freezing Arctic. She said, why are you taking me here? I said, see if you can put up how crazy I am. And we're married a couple months later, and that was 23 years ago. Now, the reason I share that story, the mind can acquire information from the future. But you also then have to make that future real. I could have ignored that dream, and I could have not done the things I did, and there would have been another probable future that would have manifested. So it's more complex than that, you see. And so whether or not that scenario that this man shared comes true or not, I think it's more about whether or not we choose to create it. And that's our choice. And I'd say no matter what the intermediate turmoil may be, the real action is what is actually going to be manifested. What we are going to see and make real. And that we will choose. And I think it's going to be wonderful. Now the interim might be pretty bumpy. This stuff should have been out 50 years ago. Right now we're running up on a timeline that's going to make it more and more difficult to get it out smoothly, but we simply cannot go on for 50 or 100 more years of the night of the living dead zombies walking around. But at the same time, it can happen. And I believe in my heart of hearts it will happen, and that good future will occur. Now, in the interim, there could be a lot of changes. But there's always change. And it's an interesting drama. At any rate, no one gets out of this life alive. So let's go for it, and let's do it, and let's not be concerned about the small things. Yes.
Well, I also want to just do it, and I am frustrated by my congressman not writing me ever about this subject when I've written him. So I'm wondering if you have ever considered the possibility of having a national march in Washington, D.C., perhaps in the summertime, announcing it on the RVML show, and having 4 to 6 million people show up.
Yes, she's asking if we considered having a march of any kind, to sort of make this very demonstrable. I think that, I have a pied-à-terre in Washington, and I've gotten to know a lot of the people in D.C. and big marches, 1 million people, 500,000 people has this effect, zero effect. It's really, Washington has become not only who you know, but who you can buy. I hate to say that, but also how you can get access. So what you need to do is develop networks of people who can get good, solid access to that member of Congress or to that senator and get them to sit down and look at this issue and consider it. But remember this, don't be so frustrated about what, I tell people, be careful of getting into a galactic level of codependency. We really can't control what they do, but we can manifest what we're going to do. And I said this to someone and it astonished them. When I was sort of almost very relaxed about what Congress may or may not do. I said, if they make themselves irrelevant, that's what they've chosen. That doesn't mean we have to become irrelevant. On the contrary, what we are doing, if you look at this, and this is just the beginning for this campaign for disclosure, is that we are doing a de facto government disclosure. Because we've got phalanx after phalanx after phalanx of military and intelligence and corporate people defecting from this monstrous secrecy who want the truth to come out. And it's going to be very hard to keep that bottled up. So as the world gets educated on this, and I remind people, somewhere between 1 and 2 billion people worldwide saw and heard this May 9th press conference event. It was on that level. So it can happen in a way that we can control by our own destiny and our own minds. And Congress is usually reactive. Now, hello, we pass airport security after, we lose the World Trade Centers. I mean, everything's reactive in Washington. There's very little true proactive effort. And so once it's virtually a fait accompli and a done deal, then it's going to happen in D.C. And that's just the way it is. And I'm not trying to be, I'm not cynical. I'm just telling you, hey, this is the way it is. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be writing your members of Congress. You should. You get on our website, disclosureproject.org, and fax your congressman and your 2 senators and President Bush at no cost to yourself. And we have this whole system set up thanks to this man, Dan Willis, who set it up for us on our website, who's one of our military witnesses. So we can do that. Yes, sir.
May you live long and prosper. My question is, why are you alive? I mean, why haven't they told you? I'm dreadfully serious.
I know you are, and I will give you a very serious answer. I do kid around a lot, and I don't mean to. ER docs have a really weird sense of humor. But goes with the territory. I'm lucky to be alive. But I'll tell you a little story. When I was 17, I was very, very sick. And I had a near-death experience. And I left my body, and I had an extraordinary experience. But it wasn't quite like, people describe, because I was raised a very, very devout atheist. Very, very, a very serious. And so I didn't, there was no image of God with a beard and throwing bolts down and pearly gates and yada yada, because I was told none of that existed. So there I was, and I had this experience of genuine God consciousness and infinite mind awareness. And I'm a 17-year-old kid. And it was beautiful. And so there isn't any death. And so I have no fear of it. Now, in 1992, after we had successfully vectored in 4 extraterrestrial vehicles near a beach in Florida, and we were signaling to them. By the way, we're going to do this up in Mount Shasta in September if you want to join us for a week. There's information on the table back there. Now, we're also going to do it in Joshua Tree Wilderness in November, and we're going to do it in Crestwood, Colorado in June for a week at a time, where I train people to do this to establish themselves as diplomats to these extraterrestrial beings. Anyway, so what happened, and it's a really gnarly thing, and it's fun, it's really cool. Of course, you're going to be out under the stars for 2 a.m., so, you know, bring your long johns. But what's interesting is that in 92, after this event happened, I had the Army intelligence head, the general who was head of Army intelligence, seek me out, and through a series of things, took me to a meeting, and they took me to a hotel room, and it was filled with spooks. NSA, we had a guy, Dr. Death, there who specializes in psychotronic killing people. We had the head of Army Intel, the whole crap, no, I'm not kidding. And they were there going, just what the hell do you think you're doing? I said, well, we discovered the Rosetta Stone of how to establish contact communication with extraterrestrial life forms, and I intend to tell as many people as want to listen. This was 10 years ago, April of 92. And he said, well, and he started trying to, you know, temper it, you know, just don't tell me not to do something, because I'm one of these Meshuggah, and I'm sure as hell I'll do it. So, with a handful as a child, I guess. My poor mother. Anyway, and I looked at him and I said, look, buddy, I said, I've been on the other side. I'm not afraid of death because there is no death. So you can't scare me. And then I said, you know, I've seen these things up close and personal. I know they're real, and you think you disappear, who knows? But right now, there's a 1 billion watt light shining on this project, and it has been for some time, since the early 90s, but it's getting brighter and brighter and brighter. There are millions and millions of people who know what we're doing and who support us. There are some very connected people in Washington who support what we're doing, even though they're laying low right now. There are some major scientific figures. And so if anything sudden were to happen like that, as I told one of these colonels in the Army intelligence, you better hope and pray I don't look the wrong way and get hit by a bus. Mean it. And he knows I meant it. So, at any rate, we have that. We have your support. But the most important thing is your support. The fact that you are here, you know what we're doing, you're pulling for us, and we're not going to do this in obscurity. We're going to do this as transparently as we can. As long as I don't have to violate the confidences of someone who asked me to keep a secret. You know, if they don't want their name used, I won't use it. But the next step of this, if you think what we're doing now has implications, wait till you hear what we're about to do. We formed an entity called Space Energy Access Systems. It's a regular corporation. We are going to identify and or build one of these electromagnetic energy generation systems that will replace all fossil fuels on the planet.
Yeah.
And when I am served with a national security order to stand down and to cease and desist, or Section 181 out of the patent law, I will go on a major network news program that has invited me to do this, and I will tear up that secrecy order in front of 100 million people and say, come take me to jail. Now that's what it's going to take. We intend to defy these illegal operations that have masqueraded as the rule of law, and they're a false national security hoax scenario, and we will not stand down.
Projected date for that? When do you hope that'll happen?
She's asking what date. Well, I'd like for it to have happened about 1955. Now, let's see, we're on this timeline. 6 to 18 months, we hope. Now, this depends on a number of things. You have to understand, we just started that a couple months ago. And we're investigating worldwide what promising scientific devices and scientific workers and talent we can pull together. We created a... we created what's called but please don't yell out without being in line, it's rude. This thing called a creative team. And these people on the creative team are scientists and engineers who are going to be helping us fabricate some of the prototypes. But we're also searching for an existing one. So if you know of someone with some interesting widget in their basement that they haven't known what to do with, give me a call. Seriously, and we'll take care of it. Now, the way this is going to work is to move very quickly from this initial phase of identification and testing, vetting, and proving the technology to a very large disclosure on it. And if you think what happened May 9th was large, that will be not 1% of what will happen on that event. But I think that what we understand now is that the same methods that have been used, the same modus operandi, the same strategies that have been used covertly to keep the UFO and extraterrestrial thing secret are identical or mirrored in keeping these new energy and propulsion systems secret. And the reasons are identical. Geopolitical control, macroeconomic control, all that kind of stuff. So what we're doing is what we've learned from all this other work, we're going to apply to that, and we're going to move very quickly in the next big disclosure. And we hope, as soon as it can happen, will be these energy and propulsion systems, because it isn't going to happen because someone in Washington waves a magic wand. It's going to come out of an effort like this, supported by millions of people, and who are giving us their cover. I hate to say it, but you're our shield. You're our umbrella. You're our protectors. You're our magic totem. And I hope that that can continue. And I hope you will be there for us. And you keep us in your thoughts and your prayers. And I'm going to say something here that's a little strange also. I do believe that there is a divine being, and I also do believe in my heart of hearts that there is enormous power in the prayer and meditation in the mind, connecting to that greater being. And so we have a network, it's what my wife and I call the spiritual algorithm. That whenever we hit another level, we activate it and we ask this network to pray for us and to hold us in life. Because I know that works. You know, I was diagnosed with fatal metastatic malignant melanoma, and I should have died several years ago. There were 3 people on my team who died at the same month. And I'm still here, and I have no sign of it, but I had a lot of people praying for me, and I did a lot of those things. So what I say to people is, there's tremendous power in that, and we should use it, and we should acknowledge it and honor it. And I ask that you help us by keeping us in your thoughts and prayers. You can do that if nothing else. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. We have a man in power that was fraudulently got there, and absolutely fraudulently. He's done more in the last year to derail decades of important, vital environmental projects to help clean up our planet. He's also given more power to the big oil and gas and fossil fuel companies.
Question, yes.
Right. So my point is, why I believe that the UFOs, extraterrestrials, were able to stop these big nuclear bombs in space. Why do you think they're not doing something to take out some of these evil people?
Well, first of all, I don't think that's their role here. And I'm going to say something very, very clear about this. You know, this issue transcends the normal fracture lines that most people see. It's really not about left, right, this is something that is of such profound importance, and we need to approach this in a way that is as universally minded as possible. Now, I will tell you that these extraterrestrial civilizations, and you want to talk about real cosmic codependency, is when we view them as sort of a deification process, where they're here to be the big brothers from outer space to fix all our problems. Or we demonize them, and we view them as these things that are all of our problems and the source of them. And I've heard both. And I think both are equally dangerous. I think here's the appropriate response. We are awake. And that conscious intelligence within us, as Erwin Schrödinger said, the total number of minds in the universe is 1. There is a singularity of mind, an awakeness, shimmering, phasing as all that there is. This I have personally fully experienced and do experience. And for that reason, we should see ourselves spiritually as equal to, not better than or less than, but equal to, and really in the same state of unbounded being and mind as any other creature in the cosmos, material or astral or whatever plane and dimension. Because that is the truth. You know, there's this wonderful Sufi saying, thinkest thyself a puny form, when within thee the universe is folded? And there is indeed the universe folded within the reality of a human, but also within the reality of every conscious sentient thing. And you can find it. And so what I say, I know this sounds like a strange answer to your question perhaps, but what I really feel, and the reason I'm going into this discussion, is that we should see that they are here to join with us as we evolve into our potential and can view them as the one being that we all are. You know, the motto of the CSETI organization that I founded, the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, that does all this training for people out in the wilderness and stuff, is that there's one universe inhabited by one people, and we are they. And so that is the true nature of who we are. And understanding that and also experiencing it, living it, is what will enable us to see that we can fix these problems. It's not their place to land on the White House long and take someone to the woodshed. You know? Now, I sometimes have to take people to the woodshed, and I do. But the issue here is really, we can all come together and manifest that change that you're asking about, and it isn't a political one. You know what I say to people? You know who our best friends are in this whole project? Our absolute most beautiful supporters and most dedicated people who've done the most and sacrificed the most. They're sitting on that funny-shaped building at the Pentagon, called the Pentagon on the Potomac. They're at the agency. They're at the National Security Agency. They're in the Office of Naval Intelligence, because they know how dangerous a rogue, out of control, multi-billion-dollar black project is. And they have seen it, and they are horrified, and they are hoping and praying more than you can imagine that we out here succeed. I have had admirals and generals weep as they have told me what they have had to face, and that they are outgunned and outmatched by an illegal, rogue, shadowy government that can trump them any day with the things that they have in their armamentarium and in their weapon systems. So I say to people, don't judge anyone when you don't know them personally. And even then, leave that to someone else, higher authority than I. Because in truth, I have found that every person is educable, that every being is awake, that everyone can be awakened and transformed, and can see and begin to work towards that good future, that sustainable civilization that is the birthright and the destiny of humanity.
Stating that as on our planet, there's good and bad and everything, and so too in space, and that there are friendly, or even, the ones we're talking about are dangerous, and there are ones that aren't so friendly, and that the shadow government is siding with them.
There's a question. Yes, I know what you're asking. That there are helpful or friendly and unhelpful extraterrestrial civilization, and there are secret governments, programs that are sided with the unhelpful ones. I know that's part of the belief system, or the matrix of belief, if I can use that concept, that's out there. I see no evidence for it, and all the deep insiders I know, none of them think that's true. Now, what I will tell you is true, is that there's been a very powerful 40-year-old program to make people believe that, so that eventually what Bernard von Braun talked about could happen, and that is that there would be a frightening presentation of extraterrestrial life, even if it's just some of them, so that a multi-trillion-dollar space weapons program could be justified. And that, I believe that that is a hoax. I don't think there's any evidence for it. Now, let's say it was true. You know, we were bombing the crap out of the Japanese and the Germans not long ago, and now we're allies. I want to remind people that if these civilizations, any of them, were frankly hostile, it would have been all over. But in addition to that, if you were to just take the position that some are and some aren't, or there's a gradation of them, the wise response would be precisely what C. SETI's been doing. Training people to go there and meet with them.
Can we meet them like you're talking about in Shasta?
Well, I mean, it's not like you could sign you up and say, you get to square, but sometimes we've had some really extraordinary encounters, yes. And with full material manifestation of them. Now, what I would say is that this is very important, that when we entertain the idea that there's intelligent life, that we pierce through all the fracture lines of diversity, as wonderful and crazy as they may be, and see this inner reality, where as you look into the eyes of every creature, you see that they're awake, and it is the awakeness, that beingness, the mind stuff, it's a singularity, and we are they. And think very carefully. This is where the heart of compassion from the Buddha is really rooted. And that is what we must do as we not only look at a Palestinian or a Jew or someone who is from Afghanistan or someone who is from Alpha Centauri. We have got to learn to pierce through the superficial and the ephemeral into the reality of each being. And if we don't learn that lesson, we can't survive. You know, people think that all these are very beautiful ideas. They're very practical ideas. Because we've reached the point in our lives technologically that peace isn't an option. It's a requirement for the continuation of life on Earth.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more question, and then I'll do a little book signing and visit with people privately. Yes, sir.
Hello there. I'm wondering if anybody you worked with, if there's ever been any discussion or contemplation on the idea of convening a independent grand jury on world court and presenting some of this information, like at the Hague or something like that.
Yes, in fact, he's asked, everyone heard that question, I hope, but Mike's working out. We have looked at that option. There are other options we're looking at. A lot of this has to do with funding. You know, all this that we did, it sounds very glorious. We did this whole project out of about 6 people donating a little bit of money, about $150,000. If we had real funding, we could have ended the secrecy 5 years ago. I would say to you, yes, that is possible, but I hope people will realize we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we hope you will help network to us people who can do the serious fundraising that we have to do, because I'm a lousy fundraiser.
Can I ask you
Thank you.
a quick question, please?
Okay, one last one.
Thank you.
This is like a child. You're like the child that says one more piece. Okay. All right.
I really honor your message. It matches my experience. I don't know how I feel about all of what you said. However, this is my question. I would appreciate your thoughts on it. If in fact there was this technology that existed and it would provide, in fact, for us funding purposes, why would those who are the power brokers of this conspiracy not want it to occur, because they too would share in it? They would lose their riches or whatever. How would you think?
It's a worldview. It's not about money. I mean, remember, if you've got, how many jets can you have?
Right.
It's not about the money. Forget money for a minute. We're thinking kind of bourgeois, middle class. Think geopolitically. Think whose paradigm and worldview is going to run the world. That's what this is about. And remember, the core of many of these programs are people who are really hard-boiled eschatologists. I mean, they're pining for the end of the world. Okay, the whole eschatological framework, the Armageddonites. And what I want to say about that is that let's make this real. Remember back in the 80s, there was an Interior Secretary named James Watt. And he accidentally left the mic open after a meeting. And this is a matter of historical public record. And he said, you know, we don't need to worry about all these tree huggers and environmentalists because the end of the world's coming soon. And God wants us good Christians just to use it up while it's still here. Now, that's true. Now, that was the policy, the chief executive of the policy of the Interior of the United States of America. And I have been at meetings with people who are multi-billionaires who share that worldview and say, well, we don't care if there's a $5 trillion debt and if the polar ice caps melt and all this goes. Christ is coming back soon and the world's going to be destroyed and us but Christians will go to the right hand of God and everyone else is going into the fire of hell. Now, I have had people say that to me in positions of enormous power and responsibility in the military-industrial complex. So, you know, unfortunately, you get this, and people say, oh, come on, I'm telling you, what you got to do is get to the core values of what makes people tick. And then the rest of it makes perfect sense. As mad as what I just told you sounds, if you get to that core value, it makes sense. So if you look at this through James Watt's eyes, and you see that he really does believe it's the end of the world. Not the end of one period in the world and the opening of another whole cycle. I think we've entered into a new 500,000 year cycle. That will be an unbroken cycle of ascendancy and peace and expansion of awareness and what have you. But if you really believe it's the end of the world literally, then what do you care if the polar ice caps melt? What do you care if you have a $5 trillion debt? What do you care? So I think that it's very important for us to be wise and wake up to the fact that sometimes these worldviews and power brokers are pretty much the same thing. And that too is an educational process. That's a process of being informed and knowledgeable. And I think that we have to understand that in many cases, people are in fact victims of a paradigm, a worldview, an understanding where that's the only solution they see. You understand? That's the only solution they see. So with compassion, we have to understand that this can be transformed, it can be broadened, but it's there. And that's part of why the world is the way it is. And we can do better, and we will. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Everyone's kind of suspected for a long time. Anyway, my testimony is very brief, and other people have much more dramatic testimony you can saw in the video, but I was in communications in the military with a high-level top secret security clearance in a facility near San Francisco that I received a report one day from a ship classified as secret of a orange elliptical object about 70 feet in diameter emerging out of the ocean and shooting off into space. The ship's radar operator tracked it going about 7,000 miles per hour, and also worked at 13 years Naval Electronic Engineering Center with a coworker at NORAD facility. Noticed objects going off the screen, high speed, going right angle turns, and supervisor said, oh, just knows it from one of our little friends. You know, so it's been out there for a long time. I know a lot of people have suspected this, and you know, when the media hit it, it said, oh, disclosure project, 450 military witnesses, documentation, some under death threats, are testifying that the reality of UFOs. So you can see that it's really important that we each do something, because the media, I think there's some documentation that was compromised that showed 43 CIA NSA operatives in major media, and so you can see why the mainstream isn't getting the full information. Is why the disclosure is doing a tour to the public like you. And I would like to ask a personal favor, and I'd like to acknowledge one person in the audience, Robert Langhorn, who did the programming, stayed up all night with me with a pizza, and we put together the fax program, which over 12,000 faxes have gone out to Washington. And I'd like to ask one favor of each one of you to go to the Disclosure Project org website, click on the fax, it's free, comes out of Dr. Greer's pocket, and want you to personalize the letter. Don't just hit the send button to President Bush. By the way, it went to Congressman Wyden and Senator Smith's office personally. We gave them all the information. I've called them personally 5 times and faxed and sent letters, not one response. It's too much of a hot potato. They're not going to respond unless there's enough public response out there. And I ask, you saw the video, write personally your own feelings. Write the letter very personally and send it. I want each and every one of you to please do that. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Dan lives in Rogue Valley.
RVML Resource Center is a volunteer-operated federal 501c3 tax-exempt nonprofit organization. RVML is dedicated to providing easy access to a comprehensive collection of information on a variety of metaphysical, spiritual, and personal development subjects. RVML accepts and appreciates all donations. Material and monetary contributions are fully tax-deductible. This recording is not copyrighted and permission is granted to broadcast, exhibit, or duplicate all or part of this program for non-commercial educational purposes. This live presentation was organized and presented by the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library and Event Center. For more information, please visit rvml.org.